I think it's 20:31 by my clock, so about a minute afterwards. Right, welcome. On behalf of the iMoot team, can I welcome James McQuillan and thank him for his time and his presentation for presenting today on creating flexible and scalable user interfaces. Thank you, James. Over to you.
Thanks. How's everybody doing today? I hope everybody's really enjoyed their presentation so far and have been learning a lot. I'm James McQuillan. I'm an LS developer for Remote Learner. LS is an enterprise add-on for Moodle, and we've recently done a lot of work in improving our interfaces for scalability, and thought I'd share some of our lessons with you today. So, what am I exactly talking about today? We're talking about scaling interfaces from small amounts of data to large amounts of data. So this isn't responsive design. We're talking about mobile. We're talking about lots and lots of users, courses, lots of information on a page, and how to maintain ease of use, make your interface so usable with a lot of information, but also make it powerful. So if you have 100,000, a million, or more users, how do you give an administrator, for example, an interface that allows them to do a lot with those users? We're talking bulk actions, finding the user that they want to find in a huge data set. Now, scalability is very, very important in applications today. If you have an interface that doesn't scale very well and you have lots of information, it's going to make people's lives a lot more difficult. So if you give them the right tools, you're going to really improve the experience for your users. And you want to be prepared for growth. And your application or your add-on would maybe not have a lot of users right now, but in the future you want to be prepared for when you do have a lot of information or a lot of users. And you want to be nice to your servers. If you're not thinking about scalability and you try and load a page with 1,000 courses on it or more, or a lot of any kind of information, it's going to be really hard on your servers getting all that information and displaying it. Now, a lot of the times problems that can be solved by adding a lot more server resources can equally be solved by better design. Now, what am I talking about exactly for scalability? This is a great example, something we're probably all familiar with. TV remotes and changing channels. Initially, we had dials, which would only have a certain amount of channels on them. And this was fine when you had, say, 10, 20 channels. They would all fit on the dial nicely. But when you got to 100, 200, 1,000 channels, a dial with every channel having its place on it doesn't really work. So you move to something where you have buttons with numbers on them, and you can enter any channel number from 1 to 1,000 or more. But that still only serves one purpose. So an even more scalable interface is something like a touchscreen, where your one device can change its display based on what you want to do. Now, moving to the web, we have very similar sort of problems. On the left is an old example from Ellis where we have a bunch of different options in one big long select box. And this shows you every single option you can choose. It's sorted in one way. You can't change the sorting. You can't do any sort of searching or filtering. Just here's all the options and good luck. On the right, we have an autocomplete type search box where you can start typing a student or a name, and it will go and search through all the various users that you have and show you what you're looking for. So rather than give you every single option, it starts to filter down the list to something that you're interested in. Now, four steps to scalability. You first want to define your parameters, identify your problems, choose your strategies, and you want to develop at scale. First, you want to define your parameters. You want to figure out who are your users. What can they do? What can their browsers do? What sort of interactions can they do? Can they do drag and drop? Can they not do drag and drop? Do they need to select multiple users at once or multiple pieces of information at once? And what information do they need? Do they only care about, say, the user's name, or do they also want to search for an address or a phone number, maybe a city, or any sort of custom user fields that they might have? What do they need to accomplish? Do they just need to find a user and, say, send them a message, or do they need to edit a single user? Do they need to edit a lot of users? Do they, say, need to enroll everybody from a certain city? So you want to understand what sort of interactions they can handle and what they need to do. And you also want to understand what data you're dealing with. Do you have a lot of data, or do you have a small amount of data? You want to think big, but keep it practical. Are you dealing with 100,000 users? Great, but you want to think big. So are you dealing with 100,000 users now, or will you be dealing with 1 million users in a couple of years? It's important to understand where you are now and where you're going. But you have to be practical. You can't expect to be dealing with, to design an interface that's going to deal with billions and billions of users if right now you're only talking about tens of thousands. You don't want to cripple your interface to deal with situations that you're not there yet. You can improve it as time goes on, and if you get to that scale, improve or replace your interface, but it's important to think of what you're dealing with now and design your interface around that. You also want to understand what sort of data you have. Do you have a lot of text information that's searchable? Is it listable, filterable? Is there a lot of different values or a couple of values? For example, cities. You might have users that have only a couple different cities. In that case, it's probably best to have a sort of filter where you list the cities versus searching it. And is all your information important all the time? Do you have to display every single piece of information at once, or can you hide that until someone actually requests it? You don't want to display absolutely everything you have if it's not all important. And next, you want to understand what your current problems are. You want to look at your interface and say, what is really hurting us right now? So an example, some examples of this are long lists of information, or the scroll of death, where you show a whole bunch of information on one page and people have to scroll through a very, very long page. If you lose your changes on a page, so say you're editing 10, 100 users at once and the user clicks somewhere else or wants to search for something else, and they've lost all their changes that they just entered. If you've ever lost changes for 100 or more users, you can understand that that's a huge pain. And if it's very hard to locate what you're trying to find, so if you have a whole bunch of users and you can't really find what you want based on, say, an address or a city, if you're only giving the user an option to search by username, by full name, stuff like that, and they want to search for something else, and they can't do that, that's a big pain as well. And that goes along with the next point, which is fixed information display. Are you only showing what you think is important? Because a lot of the times you're not going to be right. If you think that a user's full name is important and a username is important, that might be true for a lot of people, but if that's not what they're looking for at the moment, you hurt the interface for their use. And if you have any pages that take a long time to load, this is indicating an interface that could be improved by not loading so many things at once, or giving the option for somebody to load something after the initial page. And this is also an indication your servers are probably hurting. And next, you want to use what you've learned in the first two steps and identify what strategies can improve your interface. Now, unfortunately, there's no one way to say, do this and your interface will be scalable. You have to customize it to your own data, your own problems, and your own users. There are a number of strategies you can do to help improve your interface, but you really have to customize it to your own situation. Now, some things you can do, you can add searching and filtering. So if you have, like I said before, if you have, say, users with a few number of cities, you can give them an option to say, filter this list down to this city or that city or these two cities. And that eliminates a lot of data that the person isn't interested in if they're only interested in users from a single city. If you add searching, that helps as well. If somebody knows the first name of a user, but they don't know the last name or anything else, they can start typing that name and have a list narrow down the choices. Now you also want to use modern web technology where it makes sense. If you add things like AJAX calls or dynamic page rewriting, you can make your interface a lot more powerful and a lot more flexible. It allows you to only show the information that's important at the moment without causing a whole page refresh every time you want to add more information. You can just fetch that dynamically and add it to the page as needed. Now, if you need to do bulk actions, say you want to edit all users that fit a certain search, you can do that as well and give people the tools to change large portions of their information just based on a simple search. And you really want to reduce the amount of information that is not necessary. So if you display a whole bunch of information that the user doesn't care about, it's not going to help them find what they're looking for. It's just going to be a lot of visual noise. So you want to allow them to customize the interface as well. And if you can, learn what the user does and customize the interface to them before they even get there. Now, this is a very powerful concept, but it can also go wrong very easily if you're wrong in your learning. So one thing you can do is cache on the back end based on what you know about them. If they're always searching for users within a certain city, maybe you can cache that before they even get there. If you do have some strategies that you know are right, then you can customize the front end, but allow them to change it if they need to. You don't want to assume that they're always going to be doing the same thing, and then the one day that they're not doing the same thing, not allow them to do something else. So you want to keep your interface simple, and you want to make it powerful. A user should be able to sit down at your application and do a simple task without really any training or help text, help bubbles, any of that. But as they get more familiar with it, give them the tools to do more advanced actions. Now, one of the most important parts of creating an interface that scales well is developing it at scale. If you're looking at managing 100,000 users or 1,000 or more courses, create that many users or courses and test with that data set. It's very hard to understand how your interface is going to scale if you're not actually testing with the data you intend to support. So you want to create lots and lots of fake data and see how it works. You want to test bulk actions, lots of data, complex searches, see how your server can handle it. But once you've developed on a lot of data, you then want to go back and reduce the size to a small amount of data and make sure it still works. Because if you're doing a whole lot of extra steps to support large data, and those aren't necessary when you're working with, say, 10 users or a small amount of data, it's going to make the user frustrated because they're doing unnecessary steps. So if, for example, you have to add a bunch of searches to a bulk panel or something like that to do an edit, you want to allow them to just directly do it on one user as well. And the fifth step of the 4 steps to scalability, iterate. Put out your interface right away as soon as you're done and see how it works. See what people like, see what works, see what doesn't work, and improve it as time goes on. You don't have to be perfect the first time you put it out there, but you want to get yourself on a good path to a powerful user interface. You can improve things as time goes on. You don't have to have everything right the first time, but just get things going. Now, as I mentioned, I'm a developer for Ellis at Remote Learner, and we recently undertook a big project to redesign a lot of our interfaces for scalability. Now, as we had people dealing with more and more information, we found that it was very hard for them to deal with that size of information. So if they were enrolling 100 students, it could be very difficult because they had to go and do each one individually. Anything more, 1,000 students became very impractical. And we were forced to have other solutions to do that sort of action. Anything more than that was simply impossible. You really could not get to the level of 10,000 or more students just based on the interfaces we had. It was very hard to find a certain user. If you had 10,000 users, we did have some searching and filtering, but it was very hard to find a user or a piece of information based on custom fields or unusual criteria. It was very hard to do bulk actions as well. We did have some bulk user interfaces, but they broke a lot or would lose changes, that sort of thing. So bulk actions were very hard to do in the interfaces we had. And we also had a lot of inputs. So a page could have 5 different input boxes for a single user, and when you had 20 or more users, you had just a sea of input and select boxes that weren't really relevant to find the user you wanted, but were only required when you actually wanted to do something with it. And they took up a lot of space. We did have pages for our list of users. They would often break the workflow. So if you're putting in a whole lot of information on a certain page and then you went to the next page, all your information would be lost on the first page. And one of the main complaints we had from users was that it had too many clicks to do everything, or it was too clicky. And that was sort of hard to understand exactly what they were talking about, but there were so many things that you had to do that refreshed the entire page, or you had to select something before doing something else. And there was just a lot of steps to get things done. So these were our problems that we wanted to solve. And we started this project to improve all of these areas. We call this Project Deep Sight. So let's go through the steps that we talked about. And we wanted to support, this was for Moodle 2.3 originally, so we wanted to support the minimum requirements for 2.3. And this meant using IE8, which was very difficult to do some of the more advanced interactions that we wanted to do. But that was the minimum thing we wanted to support, so that was our limits in terms of technology. Now we decided that we could do some advanced interactions if they worked with IE8, but not everybody who used the software could do those sort of things. We wanted to do some drag and drop and those sort of things, but we had to provide an alternative for people who weren't familiar with that sort of interaction. We decided 10,000 users was our upper limit, so we wanted to support 10,000 users, courses, entities. That was the sort of scale we were looking at. Yes, at least it was not IE6. We were a little lucky with IE8 that we could do some of the advanced things, but yes, it was still a bit of a challenge to work with that. And our information was searchable. So we're talking about user information or course information. A lot of this is text information, so it works really well with search boxes and filters, which was nice. But we did have custom fields, so we had to give the user the ability to add their own searches on their own fields. And this data could be different types. It wasn't all, say, a name or a city. We also had things like dates. We also had choices, switches. And these all needed their own sort of interface to choose that data. So if you're searching on a date, for example, you want to give somebody, say, a calendar view rather than have them type in dates. Now, our problems. This was our enrollment screen before this project. So this would list 20 or so users on a page, and you had the ID number and the name over here. And all of this information right here is all the information that was needed to enroll a user. Now, if you're trying to find a user to enroll, all of this information is completely useless to you until you actually want to enroll them. And you can see it takes up a lot of space. Now we did have some searching up at the top here, but as you can see, it's not really clear what that search box searches on. It's just an input that says search. So is it searching on the name of the student? Is it searching on the ID number? It's not exactly clear. And if it's searching on the name, is it first name and last name? And now we do have a list of the letters up here that's next to name. But again, is that selecting the first letter of the first name or the first letter of the last name or any letter that's in the name? It's not exactly clear as well. So that was something we wanted to improve. Now this is an example that I showed earlier. This is a big long select box with every possible option in it. There is no searching, no filtering. It's sorted alphabetically, but you can't change that if you want. There's no pages. So not only is this going to be very difficult for the user to scroll through and find their option, but it's also going to be very hard on your server, because to display this page, you have to select the name of every single course or every single option that you want to display there. And it's not necessary. Now this was another page that lists users, and it's getting a little better. We do have some filters up here. So this allows you to search and filter down the list based on a couple of different pieces of information. And we do have some pages. And we don't have a lot of input boxes over here. So it's a little better than the first enrollment page, but it still had some problems. When you click the Show Advanced button over here, we get this page, and this lists every single possible piece of information that you can search on. Now, this isn't too big a list, but this also lists all their custom user fields. So if they had 100 of those, you can see very quickly how this interface becomes very hard to use if you have a lot of data. So it's a little better for scalability for users, but it's not very scalable for pieces of information, custom fields, that sort of thing. So this is what you really want to do when you're looking at your own application. You want to say, well, it works with the information I have now, but what if I expanded it tenfold? What if I had, 1 million users? Does it still work then? And like I said, you want to develop at scale. You want to create that amount of data and try it out, and try searching on unusual things. Try searching on 10 different things at once. See what happens. So we had our problems, and we knew what we were dealing with, what kind of users and what kind of information we wanted to deal with. So we had to choose, how are we going to improve this? Now we wanted a dynamic table. So we wanted a table that shows the users that that are in the system, but it doesn't show every single piece of information. We wanted the ability to add new columns, to take away columns, depending on what the user was searching for. And we used JavaScript to reduce full page loads. So when we were adding more information to the table, we would fetch it with JavaScript in the background and write it to the page, or remove it from the page. And we didn't have to reload the entire page to do that. We also did not show any inputs until the person who actually wanted to do something with the user. So this cleared up and gave us a lot more space. And we only showed what was necessary based on what they're searching or what they're interested in. Now you could search on multiple different fields. So we had multiple searches that could be added together. So you could search on the username and the address, the city. You could search on multiple cities. You could keep adding and removing filters until you got to what you wanted to do. And we had different types of filters for different data. So we added a calendar type filter, text input. If there was information that could be reduced to a limited amount of options, we just showed those options and allowed them to search through the options. And we added a bulk panel for bulk edits. So you could add people to this bulk section, collect users as you went through the entire data set, and when you were done, you could then enroll or edit all the users that you'd collected. And we had a button where you could add every single search result to this bulk panel. So if you, for example, wanted to enroll every single user from a certain city, you could do a search on that and then add everybody to the bulk panel from that city and enroll them. So you could very easily enroll everybody from a certain city or enroll everybody from a certain country. Or if you had some sort of custom field, you could enroll everybody based on a value for a custom field. So it all of a sudden became very easy to do actions with large sets of your information and filter that information to what you were looking for. Now, we did develop this at scale. We actually did create 100,000 users with random names, random data, and developed it using that information. We performed searches on 10 plus fields at once. We tried to do very, very complex searching and filtering. And this gave us an idea of how not only the servers would perform, but whether the interface worked that way, whether it was too complicated to add a whole bunch of different fields, whether it took up too much space to have a lot of these fields there. And we actually did go and enroll 100,000 users or 20,000 users. We did searches and enrolled large sections of the data at once to see if it would perform well, if it would work. This is what we came up with. And if you remember the initial enrollment page, we had just the ID number and the name and a whole lot of inputs. Now here we have the ID number and the name as well, but no inputs. It's a lot clearer. It's not as complicated, not as sort of squished together. And up at the top, we have a number of filters. Now this right now only shows the ID number and the name, but you can add more filters if you want to. So we had a whole bunch more of additional filters you could add to the list and then filter on those as well. So if you added the city, not only would you have the city filter displayed here, but you would also now see that information in the table. So this ensured that people were only seeing information that mattered to them at the time. If they didn't care about the city before, there's no reason to show it. Now each of these columns was sortable and selectable, and as you added more columns, you would see more information. So we've just added the address filter here, and now you see address and city. So you can keep adding more and more filters, and you see the information that you've added. If you want to remove it, you can remove that filter and you remove that column. Now each of these filters allows you to change the information that's displayed in the table. So I've clicked the city-town filter here, and these are the options that the user that all of the users have. So because cities aren't really like a name, you do have generally a limited amount of values for something like a city. It works a lot better to have it in some sort of option type filter where a user can click an option and see everybody that has that value. So I've clicked Toronto here, and now we see that everybody in the table is now from Toronto. So it's limited that data down to people from Toronto. And we can click on that filter again and choose another city. So we've chosen New York here, and now we see everybody that's both in Toronto and New York. So you can choose multiple values for that filter and choose who you want displayed in the table. Now this is a different type of filter we have. This is a name filter. So because you don't have the same sort of limited amount of options like you do with a city or a town, this is just a free text filter. So we have a question that says, when the filter says one city, should the column be removed? Now, if you have one value for it, I think you still want to display the data because it shows you that everybody who's in this list has this one value. This is what you're searching on. You don't want to show information that you're not interested in, but you do want to show information the user is searching on. So even though they've only selected, say, one city, you still, I think, want to show them that so they know what they're currently looking at. You can see I've started typing a name here, and this reduces the amount of people in the list even further. So now we have people both from Toronto and New York, and we have people whose name matches what we've typed in the box here. Now this is another type of filter we had. This was a date filter. So this should say filter on the creation time of the user. So you can see that our filters match the type of information that you're searching on. And this makes it a lot easier to use and easier to select the type of information that they're interested in. I mean, you could have a text input box here where they have to type May 13th, but it's not as easy to use as something like a calendar where they're more familiar with this sort of input to that data. You can see we've added a couple different filters, and going from a lot of information down to we have 10 users that match here is very easy very quickly. You don't have to search through pages and pages of information. If you know a couple pieces of information about the user you want to find, you can just add those filters and reduce the list very quickly. Now, if you remember, I said we didn't have any input boxes until you wanted to do something with the user. Now here, I've clicked the action button over here to enroll the user. And now we see those input boxes displayed for that user. Now this is information that's only relevant once you actually want to do something with the user. So hide it until they actually say that they want to enroll that user. So when you click that button, this panel pops down here, and you can enter the information needed to enroll the user. And then they disappear. Now, if you see at the bottom, we have an add all 73 search results here. So I filtered the list to people from Toronto, and only people from Toronto are displayed. If I wanted to say enroll everybody from Toronto, I can press this button down here, and it'll add everybody that's that's currently in the table that matches the search results. So when I click that button, everybody from that table is now added to this bulk assignment panel. And then you can enroll them all at once. So now this information applies to everybody that's in that bulk panel. So this makes it very easy to work with sets of data based on any sort of search requirements you want to do. Now I've just enrolled everybody from a single city, but if you created a search from 10 different fields and got very, very specific, you can then work with just that subset of information. So that is the new interface that we created for Alice to deal with some of our scalability problems. We did have a dynamic table that could add and remove information. We only displayed information when it was relevant to try and reduce the amount of information that was displayed on the page. And we got rid of that big section of input boxes that just sort of took up a lot of space. So there was a lot of thinking that went into dealing with scalability and what do we have to do, what do we have to show, what do we have to not show when we're dealing with a lot of information. How do we make it easy to find the information? And then how do we allow the user to deal with that information? So this was just one example of redesigning an interface for scalability. But the same sort of principles apply to any sort of interface that you want to redesign. And that is creating flexible, scalable user interfaces. So I hope everybody learned a lot, and I hope everybody is now going to consider scalability when they're designing their applications. And I hope you all get to deal with 100,000 million or more users on your applications very soon. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions or anything like that? Yeah, Tim, we've looked at. We haven't contributed this yet. We're looking at what we can do, what we can contribute, where this might make sense in Moodle Core. So that's definitely something that we're going to be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, James. On behalf of the iMoot team, yeah, really interesting, different sort of, slant on really looking at user interface design and how it can change and how you can cope with a very different scenario than I think a lot of people may be familiar with in schools and their organisations. So yeah, once again, thank you, and I'll hang around for any more questions.
Well, thank you.